Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me today to learn more about 8 best and high leverage practices that can be used in any classroom. As we talk about these practices, I'm going to also show you parts of our proficiency-based Spanish and French textbooks that incorporate all of these ideas. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Terri Hammatt. I'm a world language educator. I worked in Louisiana for 30 years with French and French immersion programs, and then with all of the other languages as well. And now I'm an instructional strategist with Wayside Publishing. So I'm really glad to be here with you today. Interculturality and Interculturality are the textbooks that Wayside Publishing produces, and they are truly proficiency-based textbooks that will take your students from the novice low level in level 1 up through the intermediate mid-level in level 3. We have developed a level 4 pre-AP text for Interculturality, and the level 4 French text will come out in 2023. So by the end of our time together today, you will be able to identify 8 best and high leverage practices that you can start using in your classroom right away, and explain how these practices are integrated into the Interculturality and Interculturality textbooks, and choose at least 3 of the practices that you can implement by, let's say, the end of the semester. So let's go ahead and get started. Before each of the practices that I introduce, I'll have a little trivia question to introduce the topic. Are you ready for trivia question number 1? How many steps are there in backward design? Okay, most of you should be familiar with backward design. How many steps are there? Okay, let's check and see, and the answer is 3. Grant and Mateague are the creators of backward design. They have arrived at 2 short descriptions of the process. The first way is that the process may be thought of as a purposeful task analysis. Given a task to be accomplished, how do we get there? Or alternatively, one might call it planned coaching. What kinds of lessons and practices are needed to master key performances? There are, as we said, 3 steps to backward design. You will always want to first think about the goals you have for your students, what they know and what they will know and be able to do by the end of the lesson, the essential questions, and the unit goals. Then think about how you will know that students can do that, an assessment that will show their learning towards these goals. Only then do you think about the activities that you'll do in your class to help ensure their success. Assessment that will prove whether they can answer the essential questions and have reached the unit goals. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like, backwards design in Interculturality, our French textbook. I want you to know I'll be showing you examples from both the French and the Spanish series. However, know that the textbooks are set up in a very similar fashion. So whatever I say about one will hold true for the other one as well. Here you can see our unit opener. It is the same for every unit in every level. This is what the authors first did when they started to work on the textbooks. They sat down and came up with the essential questions and then the unit goals. And once they identified what it was students were going to do and learn throughout the unit, they created their assessments, which in the case of our textbooks, they're always performance-based assessments. We'll be talking more about these assessments later as we go on. Next, after having created assessments, they develop activities. So as you can see here, the assessment at the end of this chapter is called J'y arrive, or I am arriving. Okay, it's the final assessment. And then all of this information within here, all of this is what makes up the unit. So students are exposed to the questions essentielles, the unit goals. We take a look at the J'y arrive. That's how all of this was created. And then the authors created all of the other activities to help students be successful. So for question number 2, what is our target percentage for target language use in the classroom? In other words, what percentage of the amount of time do we want to spend in the target language in our classroom? Think about that. I'm sure many of you are aware of this percentage. Okay, and the answer is 90% or more. So it's been almost a decade already since ACTFL came out with its position statement on target language use in the classroom. ACTFL encourages teachers to aim for 90% or more target language use, but that's not just the language from the teacher, right? It's from both a teacher, it's from videos and other authentic materials, etc. And it's also from the students. There are numerous reasons why ACTFL and most people associated with language proficiency and pedagogy believe that 90% environment is beneficial. Let's look at 6 of those reasons. We all know that the best way to learn a language is to be immersed in it. However, that's not the reality for most of our students. By reaching for that 90% or more, we can create an immersion-like atmosphere in our classroom, which will help learners with language acquisition. Students will learn how to manage conversations in the target language by being exposed to them and seeing how the back and forth works in a different language. Another reason for using the target language is that the more students hear the language, the more they will understand and the higher their confidence will grow. Also, the more students are exposed to the language, the more comfortable they are being immersed in it. When they are comfortable, their affective filter goes down, which allows more language into their brains. And showing that you enjoy and want to use the language demonstrates a positive attitude toward it. And we know that a positive attitude changes everything. And a last reason is that using the language in class as much as possible will allow for real conversations to happen with and amongst your students. So we just talked about staying in the target language for 90% or more of the class. However, we can't just go ahead and speak Spanish or French or Mandarin or anything else and think it's going to be wonderful. We need to make sure that what we are saying is comprehensible to our students. If not, that affective filter we talked about is going to increase and language acquisition will be impeded. It will be frustrating for everyone. Think of it like a child learning to run. You can't expect a baby to run a 5K. The baby is going to first learn to crawl. Once he gets good at that, he'll figure out how to pull himself up and eventually take a few steps. And once he's comfortable with walking, he's ready to run. The same is true for students in their language use. We can't just flood them with any and all language. We need to choose our words and take baby steps on our way to speaking more rapidly in a native-like language with them. So in order to make sure that our language is comprehensible to students, we need to provide the supports and scaffolding that will help them understand. An example of how we promote target language use is by those attractive cultural openers that we have for every single unit. These pages are loaded with highly engaging photos and images, as well as a lot of cognates. A couple of activity ideas for these pages are to use, let's say, picture talk. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Picture talk is an activity where you talk extensively about one picture. You provide lots of comprehensible input for students. And for example, you could talk about the pictures of the two cities shown in this display. These pages are from level 1, unit 5 in Interculturas. So learners are approaching a novice high level, right? You could talk about the architecture in terms of the colors, sizes, and uses of the buildings, the green spaces in the city, the water, things like that. The next activity that we have, I see, I think, I wonder, is a visual thinking strategy. You choose one picture and you talk about what the students see in the picture, just what they see. No judgments at all. For example, in the picture with a man cutting fruit in the upper right-hand corner there, students might say that they see a man in a red hat. They might say he's cutting fruit, he's on a beach, there's the ocean, things like that. Then they mention what they think, okay? So some judgments are made. I think he is working, or I think he sells fruit. Then the last step is to say things they wonder about in the picture. For example, they might say, I wonder if he makes a lot of money, or I wonder how many hours he works every day. This may sound more like output than input, but when the student is stating something, that is input for the other students and output for the student, him or herself. Also, you as the teacher can reiterate what the students say, adding on or asking questions about it to provide more input. A final idea for input is playing Kahoot with the information on the timeline and in the pictures. Kahoot, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that online quiz game. We don't have time to play right now, but students answer questions on their own devices, maybe on their phones, and to find the answers they need to scan the pages. All of that can be done with these 2 pages. Okay, so we are going to move on to question number 3. Here we go. Question number 3, what are the 3 Ps? What are they? All right, let's take a look at our answer. They are products, practices, and perspectives. Luckily, teaching culture has moved well beyond fun facts and Fiesta Fridays. The definition of culture that most teachers are familiar with now is with the 3 Ps, the products, practices, and perspectives of a target group of people or target culture. However, we have taken the 3 Ps a step further and look at how we show knowledge of these now through how we communicate with others, and also look inward toward our own culture and reflect on that. Language teaching has a responsibility to prepare learners for interaction with people of other cultural backgrounds, teaching them skills and attitudes as well as knowledge to communicate in culturally appropriate ways. Interculturality is at the heart of both Interculturas and Interculture. It is woven throughout every unit and every single level. It is on our rubrics as a separate domain so that you can assess your students' intercultural growth as well as their linguistic growth. Jackie Van Houten, a leader in world language education, has shared a framework for helping your students increase their intercultural competence. We follow this model for cultural reflection throughout our series, and I strongly encourage all teachers to do so in their classrooms. Here are the steps of the model. The first step is to introduce the topic that you want your students to reflect on in class in the target language. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about Spanish, so we introduce the topic in Spanish. In this example, from Level 1, Unit 4 on food, I want students to think about foods in other cultures. Would they like to try them or not, and why? And what foods of ours would people from other cultures find interesting? To do this, the students watch 2 short videos from blogueros, one from Costa Rica and one from Paraguay, in which they each explain a typical meal or food. As you can see with this activity, while watching the Costa Rican video, students will indicate which foods are mentioned and then complete a Venn diagram comparing the Costa Rican breakfast with their own breakfast. They do a similar activity with the Paraguayan bloguera, answering questions about her meal as well. The next step then is to do a deeper reflection at home in English. We also have an online platform for students called the Learning Site. The instructions for this activity ask students to post their reflections in the forum and to comment on classmates' posts as well. You can see right here an example of the forum, which is kind of like a social media site. In our discussion forum, students can comment and reply to comments via regular text message or an audio or a video message, or they can upload a file such as an image. Teachers can react to students' posts as well. So very much like any social media account that students have now. So we've talked about introduction in Spanish in class, deeper reflection in English at home. Now that students have the background information on the topic and they've really thought about it, you can lead them in a follow-up discussion, providing the needed support. This follow-up can take many forms, but one way to do it is to do a mingle activity where learners talk to other students in a short amount of time. You can provide guided questions like you see right here, and to help them begin their conversation. So that's our cultural reflection. And now moving on to question 4, complete this definition. All authentic resource is something An authentic resource is something created, blank, a native speaker, blank, a native speaker. What do you think goes in those blanks? An authentic resource is something created by a native speaker for a native speaker. Leslie Gran created a great graphic about choosing resources to be used in class. First of all, when possible, resources should be authentic, created for speakers of the language. Next, the resource should be appealing, connecting to learners' lives and grabbing their attention and interest. They should also be accessible, appropriate for learners' ages and proficiency levels, rich in visual support and cognates, known words with links to prior knowledge. And finally, authentic resources should be aligned with the goals of your unit or your lesson and act as a springboard for interpersonal and presentational tasks while showing an example of language and culture in context. If you're wondering where to find great, authentic resources without spending all of your free time doing so, there are some wonderful teachers out there who are willing to share their work with you. Leslie Grahn, the leader I mentioned on the previous slide, has a fabulous Pinterest board with resources categorized by language and topic. All for you. Thank you, Leslie. When using authentic resources, remember the mantra, edit the task and not the text. We don't change the authentic resource. We only change what we're asking students to do with it. Many resources are at a proficiency level that could be too high for your students. That's okay. You can still use the resource, but simply adjust how you ask learners to interact with it. Here's a list of what students can expect to understand in an authentic text according to ACTFL at different proficiency levels. Keep these types of activities in mind as you design lessons with authentic resources. Question number 5. Is traditional grammar teaching considered a deductive or an inductive approach? Okay, traditional grammar teaching. We probably all know what that is because we all probably learned grammar in that way. Is it deductive or inductive? And the traditional grammar teaching approach is deductive. However, research has shown that an inductive method of teaching grammar leads to greater understanding of the way language works and to increased communication. And of course, that's our goal for students. That being said, the deductive approach can be useful at times when teaching concepts with a lot of exceptions to the rule or concepts that are very complicated. In most cases, however, the inductive approach is a better way to help students learn new language structures. The worksheets that we've done in the past where learners do isolated grammar exercises do not really help learners internalize the concepts. Grammar taught in context, in meaning-making situations is motivating for learners. And when they're motivated, of course, their proficiency increases. So we're going to look at a grammar in context lesson from Interculturality, Unit 1, Level 1. In the first step, students process a grammar structure for meaning only. In this case, students are learning je suis means I am. But we are not talking about grammar here at all. We're not mentioning infinitives or conjugations. We just want students to understand the meaning. Next, we give students another example of the structure being used. Once again, we make sure that learners understand the gist of the conversation, and we point out the words in bold, asking learners to think about that. What could they mean? I know it's a little difficult to see on the PowerPoint, but right here it says tu es, and right here it says je suis. Okay. Next, students process the information they read and they make predictions about the highlighted structures. There is a graphic organizer right here available that helps students make their predictions. And there are also guided questions provided in the découverte box. Continuing on, we provide more input for students so they can test their hypotheses. What is this? Is there a rule here? Why are we using je suis in this case and tu es in that case? We give them more input, and it's also provided in our series with a video and an accompanying activity sheet that you see here. So let's see. Here's our video.
Hi, I'm Mariam. I'm here to help you figure out how the French language works. You're already familiar with expressions like je suis artiste and je suis bilingue to talk about who you are. Now let's take a closer look at how to use the French verb être to talk about identity. Have your graphic organizer from Découvrons un ready for this activity. Pause if you need to find it. All set? Great. Now listen to Océane and Félix. Use a check mark to indicate if the person is bilingual, an athlete, or an artist, and an X to indicate they are not. If you are not sure, write a question mark.
Je suis bilingue. Je parle anglais et français. Et toi, tu es bilingue?
Oui, je suis bilingue aussi. Tu es athlète?
Oui, je suis cycliste. J'aime jouer au sport. Tu es artiste?
Non, je ne suis pas artiste. Malek, il est artiste. Now check your answers as you listen to the dialogue again.
Je suis bilingue. Je parle anglais et français. Et toi, tu es bilingue?
Oui, je suis bilingue aussi. Tu es athlète?
Oui, je suis cycliste. J'aime jouer au sport. Tu es artiste?
Non, je ne suis pas artiste. Malek, il est artiste. Très bien. Félix est bilingue et Océane est bilingue aussi. Félix est athlète. Il aime les sports. Océane n'est pas artiste, mais son ami Malek est artiste. We didn't hear if Malek was bilingual or an athlete, or if Félix was an artist. Océane may be an athlete, but she didn't talk about that. Question marks mean we do not know. Now, let's take a look at one part of the dialogue and focus on the words in blue.
Okay, so we're going to continue on here. Students do begin to interact with the structure in communicative activities. So note that there is also in this example here, you see a détail grammatical. So a grammatical detail here that is short and just in time explanation that can be useful with this very activity. So if you haven't already given teaching grammar and context a try, go ahead and do it. There's a great chance you and your students will be pleasantly surprised. You can see here we have lots more activities for students to communicate more. Get more practice, become more comfortable with the new structure. All right, moving on to question 6. ACTFL's most recent can-do statements were released a few years ago. What are they for? Okay, ACTFL's most recent can-do statements were released a few years ago. And they are for intercultural communication. Okay, interesting. So can-do statements as a whole help students really focus on what they need to do with the language and the culture together. When students know what is expected, they are more motivated to work toward the goal. That is going to increase their proficiency and produce better results. It's not just about having can-do statements, though. It's about how you use them. In an interactive process between you and your students, conversations occur, helping students connect what they are doing with how they can best achieve a can-do statement. These powerful tools used for student self-assessment and reflection help students take ownership of the learning process. So let's go ahead and look at the newest statements here, the intercultural communication can-do statements. Notice that they are broken down into two functions. You'll see here on the left. They're broken down into investigating and interacting. Under investigating, the focus is on products and practices. And under interacting, the focus is on language and behavior. For example, I can identify some typical products related to familiar everyday life. Or I can identify some typical practices related to familiar everyday life. Down below, there are examples of how to create specific can-do statements for both types. Okay, so a very useful document that's been produced at ACTFL. And at the intermediate level, notice the function changes from I can identify to I can compare. Okay, so for example, I can compare products related to everyday life and personal interests or my studies. I can compare. Okay, and in interacting, we move to I can converse. Okay. In our series, we have both linguistic or communicative can-do statements, and we have intercultural can-do statements. Students rate themselves by indicating their progress on the bars. 1 bar means this is a goal. 2 bars means I can do this with support. And 3 bars means I can do this independently. Students can keep track of their progress and create goals based on the can-do statements in the electronic portfolio. Here they can record their ratings, upload evidence, and write a short reflection. As a teacher, you can go in and comment on their reflection as well. All right, moving on from the intercultural can-do statements into question number 7, exit tickets. 3, 2, 1, and a quick couple question quiz can all be types of what? What are they? What are these activities? And the answer is they are formative assessments. Formative assessments aren't just a regular quiz that you give. Students take, you grade it and enter the grade in the grade book and then hand it back. That is more of a short summative assessment. Summative assessments are assessments of learning. In other words, we're assessing the end point. Formative assessments are assessments for learning. It's a check to see how things are going and what needs to happen now. Do you need to reteach or review something, or are students ready to move on to the next step? Formative assessments are beneficial for both the teacher and the student. They will help you determine where to take your next lesson. They also show you which students may need a little more attention in certain areas. It helps inform both you and learners on what they can still do to be successful before it's too late. When students have targets and goals, as we mentioned in a previous section, it motivates them to be more active in their learning. Let's really take a look at how formative assessments work when you are lesson planning. The first step is the first step of backward design, where you need to identify what it is you want your students to know and be able to do by the end of the lesson. Then you teach your lesson. Next, you have students complete some type of formative assessment to gather data on how they are progressing towards their goals. This could be a short quiz, an exit ticket where you have them write something, even a simple task like surveying the students and having them indicate with a thumbs up or thumbs down. That's a formative assessment. The key with formative assessments is that they are done during learning. Students may or may not have mastered the material yet. A formative assessment should not be graded. It's for you and your students' information to help them proceed from there. So that means that you need to analyze the results. This is your data. Then, once you've analyzed your data, you respond to it by planning your next lesson or individual student interventions accordingly to what you learned from the formative assessment. This is what we do. This is teaching, right? Truly, any activity in our textbook could be used as a formative assessment. However, we do have a more formal formative assessment. These assessments are performance-based and they have tasks in the different modes of communication. You can choose if you want to get information on how learners are doing in all three modes of communication, or you can choose to just have them complete one or two tasks. We also have rubrics that we've created at Wayside Publishing. They are holistic rubrics like you see here in the different modes of communication, or analytic rubrics. Okay, moving on from formative assessments, let's take a look at our question 8. What does IPA mean? What is an IPA? Linguistically speaking, in world language education, what is an IPA? Integrated performance assessment, also accepted Indian Pale Ale. So even though IPAs can mean different things, we are not talking about beer in this case. An IPA is an integrated performance assessment. It is a summative assessment, an assessment of learning used at the very end of the unit. It is, for us at Wayside, it is a performance-based assessment so that students show how they can use the language, not what they know about it. It is comprised of tasks in each of the three modes of communication that build on each other and are all tied to an authentic task, which is a task that is something that students would naturally do with the language. Students are assessed for proficiency on a rubric, preferably aligned with ACTFL proficiency guidelines. It's not an aha, I got you moment, okay? It's a type of assessment to see what students know and what they know, what they can do, what they can show you on how they can use the language. So let's look at some examples of some tasks of an IPA. You'll see how tasks build on each other around a central context. These examples come from Paul Sandrock of ACTFL. First, here is an example at the novice level. What makes the right travel destination for me? I really love this, okay? In the interpretive mode, novice, listen to a travel log, match photos to each description that students hear. In the presentational mode, maybe they're going to write a brief website description for 5 places of interest. And for the interpersonal, in pairs, they're going to look at 5 photos and discuss their likes and their dislikes, deciding which 2 places to visit. That's our novice level. Let's move on to the intermediate level. Same topic. In the interpretive mode, intermediate, students could complete a fact sheet about the area that you selected to visit using internet resources. Maybe they could select it. Presentational, they could create a commercial and a flyer to showcase the region. Or interpersonal, they could discuss with a partner the places in classmates' commercials, explaining which they want to visit and why. So these are all grade activities at the appropriate proficiency level. We're going to walk through a quick IPA from our French series. This IPA is called J'y arrive. And you can see that the essential questions are printed here to help focus the students. Next, we have the authentic context. In this case, it's about students who are going to participate in an exchange program that their school is hosting. The first task is an interpretive task. Notice the icons of the video camera here. That means the input will be in the form of a video. Students will watch videos of 2 students, French-speaking teens who are introducing themselves, and there are 3 steps to this activity, as you can see, 1, 2, 3. So let's watch a very short clip here.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Marianne, je viens du Québec, au Canada, et j'habite à Montréal. Mon anniversaire est le 10 août. Présentement, j'ai 21 ans. Je suis très sportive. Mon sport préféré est le soccer. Je suis une élève et une athlète à l'Université de Northern Iowa. J'aime beaucoup passer du temps avec ma famille et mes amis. J'ai 2 frères et une sœur. Dans mes temps libres, j'aime écouter de la musique, regarder la télévision et dessiner. Aussi, j'aime beaucoup voyager. Plus tard, j'aimerais faire le tour du monde. Je suis bilingue. Je parle l'anglais et le français et un petit peu l'espagnol et l'italien. Bon, voilà. À la prochaine.
Here are the activities that the student is asked to complete. First, they're listening for words that they hear in the video. Next, they are listening for more details and filling out the information cards on each student. And finally, they identify which teen each sentence refers to. So we're not asking students to understand every single word, right? The next step is the interpersonal assessment, where students will write an email to the exchange student of their choosing to introduce themselves. In our online platform, the learning site, students can download a typable PDF to write that email, or they can do it right in an activity in Explorer. Explorer is our learning site, which you can grade right there online after it's submitted. Notice that both forms provide a checklist as a form of support for what students should include in the email. And the last part is the presentational task, where students create their own video blogs similar to the ones they watch to introduce themselves to the exchange student and their family. There is a PDF available where students can plan out what they will talk about. They can also record the video right in our online platform without the necessity of other external recording equipment. Notice that students once again are provided a checklist of things to include. Each IPA we have for each unit comes with a specific analytic rubric that aligns with the tasks in the assessment. Our rubrics are based off the ACTFL proficiency guidelines and performance descriptors. Okay, that has been 8 high leverage practices. Backward design, 90% or more target language use, interculturality, authentic resources, grammar and context, can-do statements, formative assessments, and IPAs. Here is my contact information if you have any questions. All right, wishing you an enjoyable rest of the conference. Bye.